I am Bhai Harjit Singh, a name that carries respect in my community, a name intertwined with devotion to the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib and the principles of Sikhism. For as long as I can remember, my life revolved around my faith, a path chosen not just for myself, but for the service of others. I have always believed that we are here to uphold equality, practice seva, selfless service, and see the divine light in every soul. Sikhism teaches us the oneness of God, the eternal Waheguru, who resides in all. This has been my guiding truth, the foundation of my identity. Every morning my day began with Amrit Vela, the early hours before dawn, spent in quiet meditation and recitation of the Japji Sahib. It is in those moments that I felt closest to Waheguru, the divine presence that unites all existence. As the sun rose, I would lead the Sangat, the congregation, in kirtan, singing hymns that spoke of love, humility, and the eternal truth. I found joy in guiding others, helping them navigate their struggles, and pointing them toward the light of Waheguru. My life was one of discipline, shaped by the teachings of the 10 Gurus. I wore the 5 articles of faith, the 5 Ks, with pride, each symbolizing a commitment to a life of integrity, devotion, and service. As a leader, I carried the weight of my community's trust. They came to me with their joys, their sorrows, and their doubts, and I offered them wisdom drawn from the Guru Granth Sahib. Yet there were moments of quiet questioning within me. I respected other religions deeply, as Sikhism teaches us to see truth in all paths. But I held firm in my belief that Sikhism was the ultimate path to spiritual fulfillment. The teachings of Jesus, though admirable, seemed distant and unrelated to my understanding of God. To me, Jesus was a wise teacher, a prophet perhaps, but certainly not divine. The concept of salvation through grace seemed foreign when compared to the Sikh emphasis on karma and righteous living. Life was stable, predictable even, until the day everything changed. It started like any other, with morning prayers and the hum of life at the Gurdwara. But by the afternoon, the course of my life was set on an unexpected path. I was driving back from a neighboring town after attending a community meeting when the accident happened. The details of that moment are blurry. I remember the screeching of tires, the blinding sunlight reflecting off the windshield, and the deafening sound of the collision. The car spun out of control, and in that split second, I felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, a realization that no amount of control or preparation could shield me from what was happening. When the vehicle came to a stop, everything was eerily quiet. My chest burned with pain, my breath shallow and labored. I could hear faint voices around me, people shouting for help, but their words seemed distant, as though muffled by a thick wall of fog. I tried to move, to speak, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I were suspended in a state between wakefulness and unconsciousness. Then, a strange calm began to wash over me. The pain started to fade, replaced by a sensation I can only describe as weightlessness. My vision blurred, and the chaos around me seemed to dissolve into a quiet, dark void. I knew my body was failing, that I was slipping away from the world I knew. Yet, in that moment, I felt no fear, only an inexplicable sense of release. As the darkness deepened, I found myself reflecting on my life, my faith, and my role as a servant of Waheguru. Had I lived righteously? Had I fulfilled my purpose in this world? These questions swirled in my mind as my consciousness drifted further from the physical realm. But then, something changed. Amidst the darkness, I began to sense a presence, a faint yet undeniable warmth that seemed to reach out to me. It wasn't Waheguru as I had always imagined, but something unfamiliar and deeply profound. The calm deepened, and I felt myself being drawn towards something greater, something beyond my understanding. I could feel my earthly life slipping further and further away, and with it, the weight of everything I thought I knew. My heart, once filled with certainty, now carried a flicker of curiosity. What was this presence? Where was I going? And then, as my consciousness ebbed like the tide, everything faded to black, leaving only the faint trace of that inexplicable warmth. I did not know it at the time, but I was on the verge of a journey that would challenge everything I believed, everything I had dedicated my life to. What awaited me on the other side was unlike anything I could have ever imagined, a revelation so profound it would shake the very core of my faith and change the course of my life forever. I floated, weightless and detached, above a scene that should have terrified me. My body lay crumpled inside the wreckage of the car, surrounded by chaos. The metallic glint of shattered glass caught the sunlight, and a small crowd of strangers worked frantically, shouting for help, their voices frantic yet muffled. A paramedic knelt beside me, his hands pressing rhythmically against my chest as though willing life back into me. But I wasn't in that body anymore. I felt no pain, no fear, only a surreal calm that was at odds with the urgency below. It was like watching a scene unfold on a screen, removed from its emotional grip. My lifeless form, something I had always associated with me, felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The stillness was profound, but it wasn't empty. There was a hum, soft and subtle, vibrating in the space around me. It was as if the air itself carried an energy, one that resonated not in my ears, but in some deeper part of my being. I should have felt afraid, but instead I was captivated by this strange state of existence. As I lingered in that suspended space, I became aware of something else, something beyond the scene below. It began as a faint glow in the distance, a light so soft yet so utterly captivating that I couldn't look away. It wasn't like the sunlight I knew, which could glare harshly or cast shadows. This light was warm, pure, and seemed to pulse with life itself. It didn't move, yet it felt alive. And it was calling me, not with words, but with a pull that resonated through every fiber of my being. I felt myself drawn toward it, as though an invisible current was carrying me closer. I hesitated. This was not Waheguru, the divine essence I had always turned to in my prayers and meditations. The light, though deeply inviting, did not align with anything I had ever encountered in the teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib. Where was the familiar sense of oneness I had always associated with God? This was different, alien, yet deeply personal. As I drifted closer, the light grew brighter, enveloping everything around me in a radiance that defied description. It wasn't blinding, though it seemed to hold an infinite depth. It was as if the light itself was alive, aware, and reaching out to me. The hum I had felt earlier grew stronger, now resonating through me in waves, filling me with a profound sense of peace. I wanted to resist, to understand what was happening, but I couldn't. The pull of the light was irresistible, drawing me further and further away from the world I had always known. My thoughts, once clear and disciplined, began to unravel. Questions swirled in my mind. What was this light? Why was it calling me? And why did I feel as though it knew me, intimately and completely, in a way I could not comprehend? The closer I came, the more I felt its warmth, not a physical warmth, but a presence that filled every part of me with comfort and calm. Yet, beneath that peace lay something else, a sense of anticipation, as though I was about to step into something vast and immeasurable. The light seemed to expand as I approached, filling my entire field of vision until there was nothing else. It wasn't just before me, it was around me, within me. For the first time, I felt small, not in a way that diminished me, but in a way that made me aware of the immensity of whatever this was. And then I felt it, a presence emanating from the light. It wasn't just light, it was alive. The presence was both gentle and overwhelming, like a vast ocean contained within a single drop. It carried an authority that was undeniable yet deeply loving, a paradox that left me awestruck. For the first time in my life, I was utterly without answers. This presence, this light, defied everything I thought I knew about God, about existence, about the universe. It wasn't Waheguru as I had always imagined, yet it wasn't foreign either. It was as though it had been there all along, waiting just beyond the edges of my understanding. As I moved deeper into the light, the hum transformed into something more, a melody, faint and unearthly, resonating with a purity that brought tears to my eyes. It was as if the very fabric of existence was singing, and I was a part of that song. Still, questions gnawed at me. Was this death? Was this the afterlife? Or was this some manifestation of my own mind, a dream conjured by a dying brain? But even as those doubts surfaced, they were overshadowed by a truth I couldn't ignore. This was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. The presence in the light seemed to respond to my thoughts, though not with words. Instead, it communicated through a deep knowing, a sense of understanding that bypassed language entirely. I felt as though it was inviting me further, asking me to let go of everything I thought I knew and step fully into its embrace. And I did. I surrendered to the light, allowing it to envelop me completely. It was like stepping into a vast ocean, weightless and free. For a moment, there was nothing but peace, a peace so profound it felt eternal. But then something shifted. The peace gave way to anticipation, as though the light itself was preparing me for something greater. The presence grew stronger, more defined, and I knew I was about to meet the source of this radiance, the force behind everything I was experiencing. I braced myself, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Whatever lay ahead was beyond anything I could have imagined, and I felt both unworthy and deeply grateful to be here. And so, I moved forward, deeper into the light, ready to face the truth it held. The light around me grew even more radiant, its warmth intensifying to a level that felt almost alive. As I moved deeper into it, the presence I had sensed earlier became more distinct, more defined. There was no fear in me, only an overwhelming sense of anticipation. This was not an ordinary encounter. This was something holy, something sacred. And then I saw him. At first it was hard to discern his form. The light seemed to emanate from him, surrounding him like a brilliant aura. But as I drew closer, his features became clear. His face radiated love, a love so profound it felt as though it was reaching into the deepest parts of my being. His eyes, filled with compassion and wisdom, seemed to look straight through me, seeing everything I was, my doubts, my fears, my hopes. Yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only an invitation. It was Jesus. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. In Sikhism, Jesus is respected as a wise teacher, a prophet, but not divine. Yet here he was, standing before me, not as a man, but as something far greater. His presence was unlike anything I had ever encountered in my prayers or meditations. It was as if he was both human and something beyond human, a paradox that defied explanation. I wanted to speak, to ask him why I was here, why he was here, but I found myself unable to form the words. It was as if he already knew everything I wanted to say, and he responded not with words, but with a feeling, a sense of understanding that filled me with both peace and awe. Then he spoke. "Harjit," he said, his voice gentle yet filled with authority, "why are you here?" The question wasn't accusatory, it was curious, probing, but it left me stunned. Why was I here? What had brought me to this place, to this moment? I didn't know how to answer. My life had been one of devotion, of service to my community and my faith. I had lived by the principles of Sikhism, striving to uphold the teachings of Guru Nanak and the gurus who came after him. But now, standing before Jesus, I felt as though everything I had ever known was being called into question. Before I could respond, he asked another question. "Who do you say I am?" The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. They were simple, yet they carried a weight that seemed to pierce through every layer of my being. Who did I say he was? To me, Jesus had always been a figure of respect, a teacher of wisdom, but nothing more. Yet, standing before him now, I couldn't deny the truth of what I was seeing, what I was feeling. He wasn't just a man. He wasn't just a teacher. He was divine. I struggled to reconcile this with my beliefs. In Sikhism, God is formless, beyond human comprehension. But here was Jesus, embodying both the divine and the human in a way that was undeniable. It was as if he was the very essence of love and truth, made manifest in a form I could understand. "You know me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You've always known me." Tears filled my eyes as he spoke. There was no condemnation in his words, only love. It was as if he was reminding me of something I had always known but had somehow forgotten. And in that moment, I felt a deep longing, a yearning for something I couldn't quite name. Then the visions began. They unfolded before me like a living tapestry, vivid and full of life. At first I saw scenes from my own faith, images of Guru Nanak walking through the fields, his teachings of equality and service spreading like ripples across a still pond. I saw the langar halls where we served food to all, regardless of caste or creed. These were the principles I had devoted my life to, and they filled me with a sense of pride and gratitude. But then the scenes shifted. I saw moments from Jesus' life, his birth in a humble manger, his teachings on love and forgiveness, his miracles of healing and compassion. And then I saw the cross. The image of Jesus on the cross was seared into my mind, his suffering and sacrifice laid bare. But even in his pain, there was a sense of purpose, of love that transcended the physical agony. I saw the blood dripping from his hands and feet, the crown of thorns pressed into his brow. And yet, his eyes, those same eyes that now looked at me, were filled with forgiveness. "This is love," he said, his voice breaking through the vision. "This is grace." The scenes continued, showing me the resurrection, the triumph of life over death. It was a fulfillment of everything I had ever sought in my faith, a union with the divine, a breaking of the cycle of life and death. But it was more than that. It was personal. It was for me. As the visions faded, I looked at Jesus, my heart heavy with questions. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because you seek truth," he replied, "and the truth has brought you here." His words struck a chord deep within me. All my life I had sought truth, through prayer, through service, through the teachings of the gurus. But now I realized that the truth I had been seeking was standing right in front of me. I wanted to deny it, to cling to the beliefs that had shaped my life. But I couldn't. The truth was undeniable. Jesus wasn't just a teacher or a prophet. He was the truth, the way, the life. He reached out his hand, and though he didn't touch me, I felt a warmth spread through me, a love so profound it brought me to my knees. "Follow me," he said, "and I will show you the fullness of truth." I looked up at him, my heart torn between the life I had known and the truth I now saw. And in that moment, I realized that my journey was just beginning. The light around me intensified, its radiance enveloping me in a warmth that was beyond physical sensation. It was alive, pulsating with love and truth. As I stood there in awe, Jesus gestured toward a scene that began to unfold before me, as if the very fabric of reality had been pulled back to reveal something greater. What I saw next would change everything I thought I knew. The first vision was of a place so breathtakingly beautiful it felt otherworldly. Colors more vivid than any I had seen on earth painted the landscape, each hue alive with energy and meaning. Rolling fields of lush green stretched endlessly, bathed in a golden light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air itself was alive, filled with a harmony that resonated deep within my soul. This was heaven. The peace of this place was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even in my most profound moments of meditation. It wasn't just the absence of pain or conflict. It was the presence of something so perfect, so whole, that it filled every part of me with joy. I saw people there, their faces radiant with love and unity. They weren't merely existing, they were thriving, basking in the presence of the divine. It was a communion, not just with God, but with one another, a perfect harmony that transcended individuality. I turned to Jesus, my heart overwhelmed. "What is this place?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "This is the fullness of God's love," he replied, "a place prepared for those who seek and accept the truth." As I gazed at the scene, I felt a longing I couldn't describe, a yearning to be part of this eternal joy. But before I could fully process it, the vision shifted. The light dimmed, and the air grew heavy. The beauty of heaven was replaced by something far darker. The new scene was stark, oppressive. The ground beneath me was barren, cracked and lifeless. A suffocating grayness filled the air, and an unshakable sorrow weighed on my chest. I saw figures in the distance, their forms hunched and distorted, as though burdened by an invisible weight. Their cries echoed in the vast emptiness, a chorus of despair that pierced my soul. This was hell. Unlike the caricatures I had seen in depictions of fire and brimstone, this place wasn't defined by physical torment, but by separation. The people here were isolated, cut off from one another and from the light of God. Their regret was palpable, a deep, unending sorrow for choices made and truths rejected. It wasn't God who had placed them here, I realized. It was their own decisions, their refusal to accept the love and grace that had been offered to them. I turned to Jesus, my heart heavy. Why would a loving God allow this? I asked, the question burning within me. He looked at me with a compassion that was almost too much to bear. Love does not force itself, he said. It must be chosen. The separation you see is not a punishment, but the natural consequence of rejecting the truth. His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I had always believed in karmic justice, the idea that our actions determined our fate. Good deeds led to good outcomes, and bad deeds led to suffering. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't about earning a place in heaven or avoiding hell through actions alone. It was about relationship, about accepting a gift that couldn't be earned. "This is grace," Jesus said, as if reading my thoughts. "It is not given because it is deserved. It is given because it is needed." I struggled to comprehend this. In my faith, the idea of karma was central, a balance of actions that determined one's spiritual progress. But grace? Grace was unconditional, unearned. It was a concept that turned everything I had believed on its head. "But what about good deeds?" I asked. "What about living a righteous life?" "They matter," he replied, "but they are not enough. Even the most righteous among you fall short of the perfection of God. That is why I came, to bridge the gap, to offer what no one could earn on their own." He gestured back to the vision of heaven, and I saw a moment from his own life. It was the crucifixion. I saw him on the cross, his body broken, his face filled with both pain and love. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. This wasn't just a historical event. It was the very act that made grace possible. "This is how much you are loved," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This is the price I paid to bring you home." Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process what I was seeing. The sacrifice, the love, the grace, it was all too much. How could I have missed this? How could I have spent my life devoted to God and yet misunderstood the depth of his love? As if sensing my turmoil, Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "Harjit," he said gently, "you have sought truth all your life. Now that you see it, will you accept it?" His words cut straight to my heart. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a challenge, a call to let go of everything I thought I knew and embrace something far greater. But could I do it? Could I leave behind the beliefs that had defined me, the community that had shaped me, and the identity I had carried for so long? I looked back at the vision of hell, at the isolation and regret etched on the faces of those who had chosen separation. And then I looked at heaven, at the joy and unity that came from accepting the truth. The choice was clear, but it wasn't easy. "What will happen if I say yes?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You will find life," he replied, "not just in the world to come, but here and now. You will know the fullness of God's love and the purpose he has for you." His words filled me with a sense of peace, a reassurance that I wasn't losing something but gaining everything. And yet, there was still a part of me that hesitated, a part that feared what this choice would mean for my life on earth. Sensing my hesitation, Jesus knelt before me, his eyes level with mine. "Harjit," he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You have seen the truth. Now it is up to you to decide." His words echoed in my mind as the vision began to fade, the light around us dimming. I knew what I had to do, but the weight of the decision pressed heavily on me. As I stood there, caught between the world I had known and the truth I now saw, I realized that my journey was far from over. Jesus looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with love and hope. "You must return," he said. "There is work for you to do." And with that, the light faded completely, and I felt myself being pulled back toward the world I had left behind. My heart was heavy, but it was also full of a truth I could no longer deny, and a purpose I could not ignore. The world came back to me in fragments, blinding lights above, muffled voices, the sterile smell of a hospital room. I blinked, my vision blurry, as shapes around me began to sharpen. My family was there, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief. A nurse leaned over, her voice calm but firm, asking me how I felt. I wanted to answer, but the weight of what I had experienced pressed down on me, making words difficult. As the hours passed and the chaos of my sudden revival settled, the enormity of what had happened began to take hold. My family was overjoyed that I was alive, but I could barely process their words. My mind wasn't in that room. It was still in the light, with the presence of Jesus, with the visions of heaven and hell. Everything I had seen felt more real than the world I was now in, and yet I couldn't understand how to reconcile it with my life as a Sikh priest. I had spent decades teaching the principles of Sikhism, oneness, equality, and service to humanity. The Guru Granth Sahib had been my guide, and my faith had been the foundation of everything I believed about God. And yet, in a moment of pure clarity, I had seen something that went beyond my teachings, something that challenged every belief I held. I couldn't ignore it, but I didn't know how to face it either. The first few days after my recovery were a blur. My family kept asking me what had happened, but I couldn't find the words to explain. How could I tell them that I had met Jesus, that I had seen heaven and hell, that everything I thought I knew about salvation had been turned upside down? I feared their reaction. Would they think I had lost my mind? Would they reject me as a priest, as a father, as a leader in our community? At night, when the house was quiet, I found myself replaying the encounter in my mind. I could still hear Jesus' words, his invitation to follow him, his explanation of grace and salvation. The visions of heaven and hell were etched into my memory, as vivid as the day I had seen them. I wanted to dismiss it as a dream, a hallucination brought on by the trauma of nearly dying, but I couldn't. It was too real, too profound to be anything but the truth. The internal struggle was unbearable. During the day, I continued my duties as a priest, leading prayers and guiding others in their faith, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I opened the Guru Granth Sahib, I felt a pang of doubt. Not because I no longer valued its teachings, but because I now saw them in a different light. The oneness of God that I had always believed in suddenly felt incomplete without Jesus. The emphasis on good deeds and karma felt inadequate compared to the grace I had experienced in the light. One night, unable to sleep, I quietly left my room and retrieved a Bible that had been given to me years ago by a Christian friend. At the time, I had accepted it out of respect, but never opened it, dismissing it as irrelevant to my faith. Now, as I held it in my hands, it felt like holding something sacred, something I had overlooked for far too long. I opened it hesitantly, unsure of where to begin. My eyes fell on a passage from the Gospel of John. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words hit me like a thunderbolt, echoing what Jesus had told me in the light. I read them over and over, each time feeling their weight more deeply. Could it really be true? Could Jesus truly be the way to God? Over the next several nights, I read more of the Bible, starting with the Gospels. The stories of Jesus' life, his teachings, his miracles, they resonated with me in a way I couldn't explain. I saw parallels between his message and the principles I had always valued: love, humility, service, and sacrifice. But there was something more, something that went beyond morality and duty. It was grace, unearned, unconditional love that offered salvation, not because of what we did, but because of who God is. As I read, I began to see my encounter with Jesus in a new light. The visions of heaven and hell weren't just about what awaited us after death. They were a call to choose life, to accept the gift that God had offered through his Son. The peace I had felt in the presence of Jesus wasn't just an emotion. It was a glimpse of what it meant to be truly united with God. Despite this newfound understanding, I was terrified to share it with anyone. My role as a Sikh priest wasn't just a job. It was my identity, my connection to my community, my family's legacy. To admit that I had met Jesus, that I was beginning to believe in his message, felt like betraying everything and everyone I loved. But I also knew that staying silent would be a betrayal of the truth I had been shown. One day, I decided to confide in someone I trusted deeply, an old friend named Raj, who had been a fellow priest before retiring. Raj was wise, compassionate, and open-minded, someone who had always encouraged me to seek truth, even if it was uncomfortable. I invited him to my home under the pretense of catching up, but as we talked, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I told him about the accident, about the light, about meeting Jesus. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from curiosity to astonishment. When I finished, there was a long silence. I braced myself for his response, fearing judgment or disbelief. Instead, Raj placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Harjit, truth is not bound by tradition. If what you experienced has brought you closer to God, then you must follow it, no matter where it leads." His words were both comforting and challenging. They gave me the courage to continue exploring my faith, but they also made it clear that my journey wouldn't be easy. I would have to face questions, criticism, and possibly even rejection, but I couldn't let fear hold me back. The truth was too important. That night, as I prayed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since my encounter with Jesus. It was as if he was reassuring me, guiding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. For the first time, I felt ready to take the next step, to share my story more openly, to let others see the transformation that was taking place within me. As I lay down to sleep, I knew that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. But I also knew that I was on the right path, the path of truth, the path of grace, the path that Jesus had shown me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The decision to share my story felt monumental, as though I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of what awaited me on the other side. My encounter with Jesus, the visions I had seen, and the truths I had learned were too profound to keep hidden. But how could I begin to speak about something so transformative, so deeply personal, when I knew it would challenge everything I, and those around me, believed? I decided to start small, confiding first in someone I trusted deeply, Raj, my old friend and former mentor. Raj had always been a pillar of wisdom and compassion, someone who valued the pursuit of truth above all else. If there was anyone who might understand, it would be him. I invited him to my home under the guise of a casual visit, but my heart pounded as I considered how to broach the topic. We sat across from each other, sipping tea, and for a while we spoke about familiar things, family, community, and the latest events at the Gurdwara. But as the conversation lulled, I knew it was time. Taking a deep breath, I began to recount my experience. I told him about the accident, the light, and the encounter with Jesus. I described the visions of heaven and hell, the revelation of grace, and the personal invitation I had received to follow Jesus. As I spoke, I watched Raj's expression shift from curiosity to astonishment. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought, and when I finally finished, there was a long silence. I braced myself for his response, fearing he might dismiss me, or worse, view me as having abandoned our faith. "Harjit," he said finally, his voice measured, "what you've experienced is unlike anything I've ever heard. But I've always believed that truth is greater than tradition. If this is the path God has shown you, then you must follow it, no matter how difficult it may be." His words were both comforting and challenging. They affirmed my experience while reminding me that the journey ahead would not be easy, but they also gave me the courage to take the next step. If someone as wise and grounded as Raj could accept my story, perhaps others might as well. Encouraged by this first conversation, I began exploring Christianity more deeply. I found myself drawn to Christian services, initially attending anonymously, sitting in the back of small churches where I could observe without drawing attention. The messages I heard resonated deeply with me, echoing the truths I had encountered in the light. The emphasis on grace, love, and salvation felt like a continuation of what Jesus had revealed to me. At the same time, I began studying the Bible with the same discipline I had applied to the Guru Granth Sahib. I read the Gospels, captivated by the life and teachings of Jesus. His compassion, humility, and sacrifice aligned with the values I had always cherished in Sikhism. But there was something more, a sense of completeness, of divine purpose, that I had not fully understood before. I also started to see parallels between the two faiths. The Sikh belief in oneness, seva, selfless service, and love for humanity found echoes in Jesus' teachings about loving one's neighbor and serving others. But the concept of grace, unearned, unconditional love that offered salvation, was something uniquely transformative. It challenged my deeply ingrained belief in karmic justice, in the idea that our deeds alone determined our fate. Grace, as I came to understand it, was not about earning God's favor, but accepting his gift. As I delved deeper into Christianity, I felt a growing conviction to share my experience with more people. I began speaking with close friends, carefully choosing those I believed might be open to hearing my story. The reactions were varied. Some listened with curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about what I had seen and learned. Others were skeptical, struggling to reconcile my account with their understanding of faith. A few were dismissive, their responses laced with disbelief or discomfort. But even the skeptical reactions did not deter me. If anything, they strengthened my resolve. I realized that sharing my story was not about convincing others, but about planting seeds of thought and encouraging dialogue about faith, truth, and salvation. I wasn't trying to dismantle anyone's beliefs. I was simply offering my own journey as a testament to the power of God's grace. One of the most challenging conversations I had was with a member of my Gurdwara community, someone who had always looked up to me as a spiritual leader. When I told him about my experience, his initial reaction was one of shock. "Harjit," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief, "how can you say these things? You've always taught us that God is one, that all paths lead to the same truth." "I still believe that God is one," I replied, "but I've come to understand that the path to him is not through our efforts alone. It's through his grace, through the gift he has given us in Jesus. This isn't about rejecting Sikhism, it's about embracing the fullness of what God has revealed." The conversation ended on a tense note, but I knew it was important to have it. These discussions, no matter how difficult, were a necessary part of my journey. They helped me clarify my own understanding and prepared me for the broader challenges I would face. As I continued to share my story, I began to see its impact. A few people, inspired by my experience, started exploring Christianity for themselves. Others, while not ready to take that step, expressed a newfound openness to discussing faith and spirituality in ways they hadn't before. Each conversation felt like a small victory, a step toward building bridges of understanding and encouraging others to seek their own truths. But I knew that the time had come to take my story beyond private conversations. I felt a growing conviction to make a public statement about my experience, to share it with my community and beyond. It was a daunting prospect. I knew it would invite criticism, possibly even rejection, but I also knew it was what I was called to do. One evening, as I sat in prayer, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. It was as if Jesus was reassuring me, reminding me that I was not alone. Speak the truth, the message seemed to say. Trust in me, and I will guide you. With that reassurance, I began preparing to share my story publicly. I didn't know what the response would be, but I knew that the truth I had encountered was too powerful to keep to myself. It wasn't just my story. It was a testament to the transformative power of God's grace, a message of hope and salvation that I felt compelled to share with the world. As the day of my public testimony approached, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation, but more than anything, I felt ready to speak the truth, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to fulfill the mission that had been entrusted to me. The moment I fully embraced Jesus as my Savior was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt as though a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my soul. The peace and purpose that followed were transformative, unlike anything I had encountered through years of meditation, service, or prayer. In that moment, I felt truly alive, connected to a divine love that transcended understanding. But while my spiritual transformation was deeply personal, I knew it wasn't meant to remain private. My encounter with Jesus and the truths I had been shown weren't just for me, they were meant to be shared. The message of grace, love, and salvation wasn't confined to any one group. It was for everyone. And that realization filled me with both excitement and apprehension. I started by speaking to small groups, carefully choosing my words to bridge the understanding between Sikhism and Christianity. I wasn't there to criticize or dismantle the teachings of my community. Instead, I wanted to show how God's love and grace extended beyond boundaries, fulfilling the truths that had always resonated deeply in my heart. For many in my Sikh community, the concept of divine grace was both familiar and foreign. The teachings of Seva, selfless service, and Nam Japna, meditation on God's name, aligned closely with the Christian emphasis on love and worship. But the idea that salvation could come through grace alone, through a gift rather than deeds, was transformative. It wasn't about earning God's favor, but accepting it. This idea challenged long-held beliefs, but also offered a profound sense of freedom. Not everyone was receptive. Some members of my community viewed my transformation as a betrayal. They couldn't understand how someone who had been so deeply rooted in Sikhism could now follow Jesus. I faced criticism and at times outright rejection. Former friends and colleagues distanced themselves, and my once unquestioned role as a spiritual leader became a point of contention. It was painful, but I knew that the truth I had encountered was worth any cost. At the same time, I experienced moments of deep reconciliation and connection. My family, though initially shocked, began to see the peace and joy that my new faith brought me. My transformation sparked conversations that we had never had before about God, grace, and the purpose of life. Over time, these discussions brought us closer together, even as they stretched the boundaries of our understanding. One of the most emotional moments came when I spoke to a young man in my community who had been struggling with his faith. He had always felt torn between the teachings of Sikhism and his curiosity about Christianity, but he had been too afraid to explore his questions openly. Hearing my story gave him the courage to seek answers for himself. "Your journey," he told me, "has shown me that it's okay to question and to seek the truth, even if it leads us to unexpected places." These moments of impact reaffirmed my mission. I wasn't just sharing my story. I was planting seeds of thought, encouraging others to embark on their own journeys of faith. The rejection I faced paled in comparison to the joy of seeing lives transformed, even in small ways. As I continued to speak publicly, I began to find a new spiritual family within the Christian community. The warmth and support I received from fellow believers were a source of strength during challenging times. They embraced me not as a former Sikh priest, but as a brother in Christ, united by the shared experience of God's grace. At the same time, I worked to maintain respectful dialogue with my Sikh community. I emphasized that my journey wasn't about abandoning my roots, but about embracing the fullness of God's revelation. I spoke about the common values we shared, love, service, and devotion, and how these were fulfilled in the message of Jesus. While some remained skeptical, others began to see the parallels and the possibilities for deeper understanding. As my story reached wider audiences, I felt called to do more. I started writing about my experience, hoping to reach those who might never hear me speak in person. I collaborated with others who had experienced near-death encounters and spiritual transformations, amplifying the message of God's love and grace. Together, we created platforms where people from all backgrounds could share their stories and explore faith without fear of judgment. One of the most powerful moments of my journey came when I was invited to speak at an interfaith gathering. Representatives from various religious traditions came together to discuss commonalities and differences, seeking to foster understanding and unity. Standing before such a diverse audience, I shared my encounter with Jesus, not as a divisive event, but as a testament to the power of God's love to transcend boundaries. God's love, I said, is not confined by our human categories. It reaches out to each of us, calling us to know Him and to be transformed by His grace. My journey may have taken an unexpected path, but it has shown me that the truth is not something we create. It is something we discover when we open our hearts. The response was overwhelming. People from different faiths approached me afterward, sharing their own struggles, questions, and moments of clarity. It reminded me that while our paths may differ, the desire to know God is universal, and that desire, I believed, was a reflection of God's own longing to be known by us. Reflecting on my journey, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the encounter that changed my life, for the courage to seek and embrace the truth, and for the opportunity to share that truth with others. My transformation was not just about accepting Jesus as my Savior. It was about discovering a purpose greater than myself, a mission to bridge divides, inspire faith, and encourage others to seek the God who loves them unconditionally. To those who hear my story, my message is simple: never stop seeking the truth. It may lead you to places you never expected, but it will also lead you to peace, purpose, and a love that surpasses understanding. Whether you are questioning, curious, or firm in your beliefs, I invite you to reflect on your own journey and to open your heart to the possibility of transformation. And to you watching, I encourage you to share your thoughts or prayer requests in the comments below. Let this be a space for dialogue, for questions, and for support. If my story has resonated with you, I invite you to explore more inspiring testimonies of faith and transformation. Together we can seek the truth and be transformed by it. Thank you for listening.